so much for staying with us. Now, a wave of protests swept through Kenya. Maybe it's still on. Of course, we know it was triggered by that controversial proposed tax hikes. And that movement has evolved into a wider campaign for more accountability in government in the country. Some demand that the entire government should resign. Of course, we know it all came from the supposed, the finance bill, which the president has since withdrawn. Of course, you also know that at some point, the government said that the protest had been hijacked and all of those things. But what are the lessons we can draw from that? I think a number of us will remember that we've had such waves over time. I don't know if there's ever really been such a wave that's revolutionized anything. I know that some who in history will remember the Aba women's riots, will also remember Funmilayo Ransome Kuti's move with the Egba women, which both happened about the same time. If you watch the movie Funmilayo Ransome Kuti, you might get a sense of that. But I don't know whether in recent time such a thing has actually made any move without some kind of divine intervention. In 1993, we know what happened, and the response of the people to that, and the pressure that compelled the president of the day to vacate his seat, hand over to an interim government, which was taken over by another military government. And we know that that military government didn't quite give up. Civil society organizations didn't stop making the noise. But was that what really caused the change? No, not really. When the third military government in that space came in, then he had to just hand over to a civilian authority. In 2012, we had that wave. Was over in a week. Was it able to really change anything? Well, maybe there was a bit of a reversal of the fuel subsidy at the time. And then the NSAS. Did it really achieve the kind of things we desired? I don't know. Let's see what we can come out of this with. Government of the people is what we're talking about. Lessons from Kenya. Professor K. Ikechukwu joins us this morning. He's Executive Director, Development Specs Academy. He's with us right there in our Abuja studio. Thank you for joining us this morning, Prof.
Thank you very much, Ayo.
I've just gone down through history.
Sorry, before you open up, before you open fire, let me alert you that you're in the process of generating a protest. You're talking about your cocoa and a dash of honey, right? Now, how many Nigerians can do that? Don't get yourself into trouble. Don't be telling people how much is a can of cocoa. Boy, take it easy.
Well, those who have been following the program as you know that I take my cocoa because I want to live a little longer. Okay. You know, you know, take it easy. I hope that this doesn't start any riots, because if there would be any, we'll be talking about food insecurity for a while now. Thankfully, it hasn't really caused anything. Even though I think it was someone talking in the course of the week, I forgot who it was now, saying that we're at risk of some kind of protests over the cost of food. But it's part of the whole in these conversations that we are having. People were complaining in Kenya of one thing or the other, especially when the government of the day now decided, you know what, you guys need to pay more taxes through the finance bill. And then the government, the people took over government, so to speak, and said, no, this has got to end. And that's what we have. In fact, I saw a video of a young lady who said, look, we understand taxing, we understand all these things that are necessary, but when the budget is heavy, the first thing you want to reduce or remove are what you call non-essential items. And for the young lady to have said that, she probably has looked at the budgets and to see the things that the people may have considered essential or non-essential. Are there lessons that you think we can identify from what happened in Kenya, and if we have ever considered such a thing?
Well, there are lessons, but let's also put the issues in context. Kenya's debt stands at about $80 billion. It's dealing with it progressively. Now, 3/4 of the country's economic output goes into the repayment of debts, in addition to 65% of its internally generated revenue. And remember that this tax thing that's leading to protests is part of the recommendations of the International Monetary Fund. There's a simple question on the table, and that's in that there should be a lesson for us. When government is thinking of raising revenue, is it that the best way to go about this is to tax the people? That's question number one. Question number two, it is time for all African countries to sit down and calmly ask themselves, looking back in the last 40 years, how many of the suggestions and interventions of the International Monetary Fund has led to real development, has led to people-focused interventions, has led to proper national self-management? Those are the issues, because if you look at the poverty in Africa, look at the interventions of the World Bank, you look at the interventions of the IMF, you ask yourself, why is it that nations borrow in Africa, poverty increases, the debt increases, so the things for which the money is borrowed, you can't see it, and yet poverty is going on and on. So I thought I should give that background before coming forward to whether there are lessons for us. Now, the protests are not just about whether or not
sorry, Prof, if I can quickly piggyback on the issues that you just raised now. It's not like these issues are unique to Kenya, even here in the country as well. I know maybe we just talk about the lessons in the course of time. It's not that those issues are unique to Kenya. Okay. They also happen here in our country. And it is not like Kenya doesn't have natural resources. It's not like Kenya doesn't have human resources. So what is the genesis? It definitely isn't because the government came up with a finance bill, just that. That was just like some kind of the last straw that broke the camel's back, that caused that kind of revolt or reaction from the people. So is it a problem of the people or a problem of governance over time? What exactly would you say was the history to it? We know the West would always want to do what the West would want to do because it's all about opportunities. So what do you think was the source or the crux of the matter over time, or it was just a spontaneous thing?
There's a question of what has been going on over time, but more importantly, if you look at most of the comments and reactions of those driving the protest, there are three key issues they are bringing up. The taxes are heavy, we're already taxed, and you're multiplying avenues where you will apply tax. So if you tax me, if you increase my income tax, you increase taxes on all the things I spend on, it's still coming from me. Now, the same people you're taxing are looking at the ruling elite. They are looking at the expenditures on the government, on the presidential villa and the rest of it. You know, those are some of the issues mentioned, which made the president to indicate that, okay, we're going to cut here and there. The point is this. National resources are for national development. Now, development involves costs. That cost and the funding must come from somewhere. Now, the issue here is you want that money to come from taxation and from the people, and the people are looking at the living standards and the reflexes of those in office. Their privileges are on the increase. They are living in luxury. You can see that Kenyans are also putting up on X platform and many others all the signs of opulence among the ruling elite. So it's a growing perception of, look, we're being drained. Those around us are not sensitive. You say it's a government of the people, but it's looking more and more like the government of those in power to make themselves comfortable at the expense of the people. More importantly and more critically, Kenya has borrowed just like every other African country. The borrowings, what were they deployed to achieve? Are they achieving that? If Kenya implements the taxes it has in view, how will that affect the level of living? How will that affect poverty? How will that affect social security and the rest of it? So you find that initially the protests were rather peaceful. Okay, we don't want this, but over time, and as more and more material was getting into the social media about how the elite was living, how the political class was living, for the president, for Ruto to say, okay, he's going to cut down on, what do you call it? There will now be no budget for the office for the president's wife, among so many other things. I think the cost run into $1 billion something. It tells you that this is a comprehensive response not organized by anybody who is just the opposition, but by aggrieved individuals who are citizens. But here is the danger. A protest, no matter how justified it is, if it is not led, it will degenerate into confusion. And we have the examples. You mentioned NSAS earlier. NSAS was a very timely response to the excesses of SARS, which is an agency of the Nigerian police. But imagine that that protest lasted maybe for however long. You cannot rule Nigeria from a toll gate. There must always be organized interventions. And it's interesting you said, yeah, in the past it had led to revolutions, but today we are not sure what to make of it. Look around you. Everybody, at least sometime in the past, celebrated the Arab Springs. You know, it was the protest of the people that led to these governments being overthrown. But the question to ask is, in those countries where it occurred, do they still have a country? You look at Libya, you look at Sudan. So, whereas it is important to raise issues, object to obnoxious policies, demand accountability from the leadership, organized interventions are the solutions. They must be spearheaded, there must be specific demands. Like when the NSAS thing was going on, I recall I think I was on this channel and you were also on air, and I made 2 or 3 specific suggestions. Let the drivers of that protest indicate in clear terms A, B, C, D, 2, 3, 4, whatever it is they're asking for. Let them have representatives. Let there be a meeting with government. Let there be clear outcomes. I'm not one to celebrate angry crowds. People can get angry, but a crowd becomes its own damage. I mean, its own enemy when it goes on. I was on the Guardian editorial body during the June 12th. There were June 12 riots. Nigerians were deeply angry about so many things. Until Nadeko gave it some kind of direction. What happened was that as you are on your own driving on Ikorodu Road, because you look a little healthier than the average person, you get attacked. That's not what we're looking for. But are there lessons for us? Yes. The lesson here, and that's something for the ruling political and economic to note, is this. When suffering becomes unbearable, when people cannot pick their daily bills, when it becomes impossible for even the elite to be safe, it means that there are fundamental things government should be doing that is not doing. Today, emirs get kidnapped. Everybody in a fine car is in danger of becoming a victim. Serving generals get shot on the road, not because they are targeted, but it's opportunistic criminality. That's not the kind of country we're talking about. So we are hungry, we are angry, everybody is unhappy. But a country must exist before you oppose the government governing it. And so, whereas there are lessons, it's actually for the elite to begin to recalibrate its own reflexes. And when we speak of the elite, usually...
My apologies. Perhaps we're actually leading to it by not paying attention. Some of these things don't just happen. As you mentioned, Prof, history is there to learn from. It would seem like generally across Africa, we don't seem to learn from history. And secondly, we don't seem to be building for the future. It was in the 80s that a young lady sang the song then. I think her name was Tosin Jegede. Parents, listen to your children. We are the leaders of tomorrow. We are the leaders of tomorrow is what we hear. And guess what? We're still calling them the leaders of tomorrow without giving them the reins of power. I also always say something, that the people who are in governments today, who are in civil service today, in almost 1,500 ministries, departments, agencies, and corporations of government, were not in government 30 years ago. So it would seem like we're not passing on the torch. We're not communicating the future as they come in. The orientation they get is that of opportunism, is that of defending yourself, protecting yourself. It's like we have hurt in the past, and we're still healing the wounds of the past over time until now. So what do we need to do? How will the young people react when all they see is the things that you have described? Opulence and seeming wealth of people who may themselves be struggling.
Well, for me, a lot of young people keep talking of how young they are until they discover they've turned old. If you're young and you say you're leader of tomorrow, you must ask yourself, what are the paradigms for tomorrow? Am I acquiring those paradigms? Do I know enough about my country? You see, we have a certain, if I like, delusional perception of the capacities and relevance of youth. As we speak, there are many young people who are in high places. Today, you would describe Tony Elumelu as belonging to the older generation, if not, middle between the very old generation and the young. Go and check Tony's record as a young man in his 20s and 30s. Go and check most other people's records. The thing we overlook is that you tell us, look, Nigerian youths got us independence. That is a fact. If you look at all those who fought for independence, they were very young people. They fall within the age bracket. What a lot of us overlook is that it was Nigerian youths who destroyed this country in 1966 going forward. What do I mean? The first set of youths who got us independence had international exposure. They knew what was in the interest of their people. Look at Awo's sophistication and intelligence. Look at Zeke's sophistication and intelligence. Look at Sir Ahmadu Bello's understanding of the needs of the North, his attention to education, his attitude even when people came for money for Hajj. He said Hajj is for those who can, if you can afford it, go on your own resources and all of that. Now you come. Another set of youths took over. Think of the 1966 coup. What was the age of the person who overtook it, who carried out the coup? Who did he consult? And so you find that with that event and many other events following it, a new set of young people with guns who didn't have the knowledge, international exposure, understanding of national development involved, ran out, took over, and a lot has happened since then. Many of them are no longer here. Many more of them have grown into very old men. And so the young ones will look and say, oh, you see, is this older generation that destroyed Nigeria? No, look back. What point am I making with that? When youth is not sufficiently informed about its environment, it doesn't understand the paradigms of development and leadership, and situates itself only within a grumbling platform, they will always think they can perform magic. And that's why working extensively with a lot of young people, I always tell them, seek knowledge. That's not the same thing as go and get a degree. Understand your operating environment. If you're going to become head of state today, you're going to run a country made up of many states, made up of many things. Can you do that? Can you treat a fire? And the way I sympathize much more with them is that you also have now an older generation that is not doing enough mentoring for the young. That is employing them as PA and SA, and the only skill they have is to carry bag, and they're hoping to get into appointment somewhere. So the damage has become much more extensive. Leaders of tomorrow, yes. What are the paradigms of tomorrow? Is a 21st century world? Is a VUCA world? The youths who are more visible than their colleagues, are they part of that world? Are they part of the consuming elite in Nigeria? You look around you, Kenya is in protest today. Should we have the number of senior special assistants we have in government at state and federal levels? Should we have this? So you find that the convoluted platforms, structures and expenditures for public administration makes it impossible for genuine development to take place. Lagos was governed by Jakonde. How many commissioners did he have? Did he have a single senior special? Look at what he did in 4 years. How many governors have been able to do that in 8 years? You look across the country all over the place. Now the regions. The entire North is made of how many states now? More than 18. It was governed by one person with a certain number of commissioners. Now you have how many governors? Let's even assume it's 15. Of course, we know the actual number. How many commissioners? How many official vehicles? How many senior special assistants? Among so many other things. That's part of the crisis of the Nigerian state. That we have bloated administrative structures for public administration, delivering less value, reading budgets, without on each occasion before the new budget asking, okay, last year's budget, how much of it did it deliver? Why is it on record that in most states of the Federation, you find that empowerment programs are going on, but for the last probably 9-11 years, 40 or more % of all those coming for youth empowerment had taken part in previous empowerments. Government has become a drain on itself because the overall space has shrunk. So bringing it all around, the issue on the table is fairly simple. The political elite, the economic elite, the traditional elite are the ones who stand in greatest danger of demolition. If there is indeed the kind of protest we are talking about.
You know, just
vulnerable. And that vulnerability will increase for as long as The right steps are not taken to address pressing challenges.
I'm not sure that even the elite is aware of this delicate situation. In the course of the week, I happened to be at a meeting of, talking about local government autonomy, to which I was invited. And one of the revelations that came to me privately from someone who was just talking to me said that one of the caretaker committee chairmen in Rivers State has caretaker committee chairman has more than 30 assistants. More than 30. Of course, we can imagine that many of them are young people and all. But when you spoke about the elites, there's something that I continue to ask, and a good number of professors such as yourself, Prof, have also pointed at the need for it. Elite consensus. Was there such a thing in Kenya? Is it possible to have such a thing here in Nigeria? Even in the different regions, in the southeast, in the south-south, in the southwest, or even in the north central, northeast, and northwest, do we have the opportunity of elite consensus? That the elite will come together and say, guys, let's go in this particular direction. And everyone in the political space, in the economic space, in those environments will agree, okay, this is in it for us, this is in it for us. We disagree on this, but we can compromise this. We disagree on this, but we can compromise this. The elites come together and they agree for a particular national narrative. Do you think that could have staved off the riot in Kenya? Do you think it is something that can also help us in Nigeria?
There was elite consensus in Kenya, at least the political elite. The consensus became manifest in the law they were about to pass before the protest began. If they didn't have a consensus, they would have agreed. So the consensus was to tax the people, get all the money from them, but continue living the way you're living. So elite consensus can be conscious or unconscious. In the case of our country here, yes, we have elite consensus. That consensus is manifest in all the things that are going wrong that nobody is protesting against. And when also you speak of consensus, it will depend on which arm of the elite. Let me give an example. The political elite, you're either in public office by election or by appointment. So imagine that you have state governments, you have state governors, and Nigeria is running. But today, as we speak, there is the Niger Delta Development Commission, there's Northeast Development Commission. Every part of the country is looking for its own development commission. Nobody is asking the question. The Niger Delta that first got a commission, has it been developed? If you look at the trillions of naira that have gone into that section of the country, I look at the kind of projects, and you look at the question of impact on the actual lives of the people in a degraded environment. Is it working? What's the cost of their building? In the case of the North, so my take is fairly simple. When you create such commissions, it is not the man in my village or your village that will be there. It will be another arm for the elite to live at public expense or running budgets that are sometimes bigger than that of the state, ostensibly for national development. I've always maintained the view, and I'll repeat it here, those commissions should be scrapped. Take the money to the states in those regions. If you say the governor is embezzling it, let him fight with his people, let them sort themselves out. Those are some of the complications we are living with. So is there elite consensus? Yes. That consensus also manifests sometimes as insensitivity. But it would be unfair and unjust to suggest that the entire Nigerian political elite is made up of irresponsible people who don't care. No, that is not correct. But the issue on the table is that also, if you look at the political reflexes over time, there is a preponderance of actions that suggest that those taking those actions are not sufficiently sensitive to the environment. And I'll pick one that's apparently unrelated to this. You recall that from time to time you hear of how the Air Force or the Navy has destroyed 50 illegal refineries in Rivers State or in some other parts of the country, of that region. 4 weeks later, here they destroyed another 18, etc. Meanwhile, in that same place, remember that Wike at a point read the Riot Act to his commissioners A local government chairman, if an illegal refinery is found in your place, you're in trouble. Now, the point I'm leading to with this is that we are not exploring all the tiers of government that are responsible for what's happening around them. What do local government chairmen exist to do? Why are there councillors? Why are there ward chairmen? What is their role? And when local government gets 100 million in a month and nothing happens, is that the fault of the presidency? So what I'm saying is fairly simple. The decay of a sense of service delivery in leadership has permeated every strata of government. And that cannot end except there is some level of, change of orientation. It will not come as a consensus at first, but it can be built into a consensus.
Prof, very, very interesting way, that you put it. So the consensus is more for the interest of the elites, not for the interest of the people. Okay, so is it possible for the elites to come together and say, look, let's step down our interests for a bit and look at the nation? And there's this message on X by Skittish Money. Tola says, Fela sang, government teacher is culture and tradition. Even where the people in civil service are newer sets, what is the culture in the civil service? Transformation of the civil service is what is required if we want a functional system. Do you see that happening? We've been talking about the Oronsori report for a while. We understand that there is some pushback already from those who are afraid that they might lose relevance or lose opportunities if that happens. Do you see this transformation happening?
No, it's not going to happen in the way idealists are thinking. People who talk about policy, if you make this policy, Nigeria will be wonderful. Before you plant a tree, find out whether it can grow on the soil where you're carrying it to. Now, you look at Nigeria it is today. One of the best things that can happen to this country is for us to return to regionalism. 6 regions, 6 governments, fantastic idea on paper. Now, that is delusional. You know why? Who is going to agree to that? I'm a governor. Ayo, you're a governor. All our friends are senators. There are House of Reps members. And to even create the states, we got our states because we were protesting that we are being marginalized in our region. And now you think we'll sit down and be clapping when people are trying to bring the regions back? The answer is no. So if you are talking about consensus, you must ask yourself and look for feasible consensus. Consensus cannot be on the ideal. It must be on what is feasible, what is workable. So I agree. For me, regionalism is perfect. It's the only solution to our problem in terms of reduction in cost, among so many other things. But anybody hoping to make that happen today, without prejudice to the caliber of people involved and organizations, it will be a very, very tough sell. Governors will sit down today and agree with you to collapse their structures. Even if you say, okay, let there be a regional coordinator and the states will still be there, my question will then be, is that not another platform for expenditure? You want to create one more state. To create the state, you consult all the 36 states. The 21 assemblies will have to agree. Who will agree to that? So I'm leading up to a very simple and straightforward point. Every attempt at a consensus must contend with interest benefiting with the status quo, benefiting from the status quo. Now, where the status quo is very entrenched and has the finances to undermine your own engagement, you can speak of consensus. But a good deal of the time, it will take force majeure, whereby a serious calamity or something leads to, and sorry, to switch this now, going to the June 12th thing. Yes, people will tell you that because Nigerians protested, that's why Babangida stepped aside. I take a contrary view. You see, to speak in military terms, he lost command. Abacha was more acceptable. Babangida was not as rigid. He could be spoken to. I think he was reconsidering, but the Abacha angle and all was that, look, we don't want this. So the point being that every attempt at a consensus has the reality on the ground to contend with. And my question, throwing it back to all of us, is, do you see the current Nigerian elite that approved, I think, 30-something billion for a car park for the National Assembly, that approved all that money for interventions and renovations in all the places, as a type of elite that will sit down and do itself out of a job? An elite that has members who have spent 10, 8, 12 years in the assembly, got constituency projects. The same elite that saw Gbajabiamila. Go and look at what Gbajabiamila did in Lagos with his own money. The same people, the same kind of money they received. What billions? Clear development intervention. So imagine that all the others who were in the house with him, who got the same amount with him, also made interventions in their environment. It will be a different ballgame. Summary. There is a subsisting national consensus. That consensus is a disposition to insensitivity, to speech making, to living in luxury and telling the people you're working for them. But it's not all bad news. The people, imagine for instance you have a leader, and that's why I say the critical role of this leadership should never be downplayed. Leadership signaling is often and most of the time a decisive index of what can happen or what cannot happen. That is part of the issue on the table.
You know, Prof, it's very interesting that we're talking about this now. At the end of the day, this elite consensus must happen. The question is how. I'm receiving a message from someone watching now who is asking, the big question is the government our master or our servant? When the people fear the government, that's tyranny. When the government fears the people, that's freedom. Which one would you say, Prof, is the preferred state? And what's the pathway there?
Let's work with a sense of history. And I will also respond by asking a couple of questions. Is it true that some people in office today, I hear many, or majority, got into their elective positions by means that are questionable in terms of electoral process? And I'm not talking even at the national level. Look, state houses of assembly, governorship positions, etc. If the answer is yes, and you're saying it's government of the people, with all due respect, it's government of the people who put that government or that person in place. And they are the people he will work with and work for. That's number one. Number two, when I borrowed 2 billion naira in order to get to the Senate, and I know that my entire entitlement while in the Senate will not be up to 1.5 billion, you know that for me, it's an investment. I have to find whatever means exist on earth to recover that money. So I'm thinking of oversight functions where instead of oversighting whatever it is I've gone to oversight, I'll collect something and go. Now, that's the environment within which we are operating. People will tell you, oh, this doesn't happen in America. And I tell them, this is not America. When you allow your own rights to be sold off upfront for 10,000, I gave you 10,000, you voted for me, you sold your very existence to me for the next 4 years. So you're worth 2,500 every year. The whole point of this is, let us first of all admit the challenges of the human environment we are in. Admit the fact that the demands of the people make it difficult for genuinely intelligent leaders to emerge. Make it also clear that in spite of that, somebody can lead well. If we make these admissions, another admission we must make is that our youths are being wrongly mentored by the political elite. And it will not take the presidency for me to go and start a youth program in my local government, not my state. It will not take the IMF for me to know that there are things I can do that can become examples. I don't need my bishop to tell me that when I'm going to visit my mother, I don't need to go with a convoy of 9 vehicles because I'm a public office holder. Because as you're doing that, you're doing unconscious mentoring of the elite, of the youth. Oh, that man, whenever he's coming, there are policemen with him. He's driving very fast. Nobody can approach him. I want to be like him when I grow up. Now, that's a new leadership culture that the youths, you say, are leaders of tomorrow. That's the kind of tomorrow you're forcing them to prepare for. Whereas in the past, these were, you look at a leader, his dignity is compelling, he's believable, etc. Those are the challenges, and it's not by, and that's why I believe agencies like National Orientation Agency, yeah, people may say, oh, what is it doing? National Orientation Agency needs better funding. State agencies like that, but most importantly, leaders must show by their personal reflexes that at least they even had a proper upbringing. There's a way people behave in public. Ostentation, debauchery, those are not the things that define anybody in any culture, anywhere in Nigeria. So what is it that has happened to us? But instead of asking the question and saying, oh, it needs to be better, let everybody engage where he is. I run programs, youth programs, whatever you choose to call it. Let people engage where they are. Not gather in a big hall, air-conditioned, capacity of the hall 300. You make a fine speech, which somebody wrote for you, by the way, and is reported in the paper, and somebody says, no, that's not the way to go.
Okay, Prof, just lastly, I'm really very happy that you said you work with young people all the time. What would you say, okay, what are the youths saying, the ones that you're talking about, you are talking with, that you interface with? What are they saying? How are they feeling about our nation now? Hopeful or not? And how do we build their hope? If you can do this in 60 seconds, sir.
They are not feeling hopeful. They are not feeling hopeful. They are not happy. But after presenting the challenges to them, I see my primary duty as that of getting them to see ways out of the challenges. And very often I use the example of Mandela and Thabo Mbeki. Mandela was a young man back then. I mean, Mbeki and some of his colleagues went to meet Mandela and Mbeki's father, the major drivers of the struggle. They had designed a very wonderful plan for dealing with the whites in South Africa. They say from the next week, they will start throwing bombs into their windows, burning their cars in the neighborhoods, and all of that. They'll keep doing it until the white people will leave South Africa. Mandela sat them down. I say, you're stupid. If you start that, at most, some of you will be alive for the next 1 year. The luckiest among you will be alive in 3 years. But I can tell you that in the next 10 years, those who will be doing this thing you're doing with people, not 18 and 20 like you, but those in 11 years or less, because they will have killed off the rest. They asked him, so what's the solution? He said, one simple sentence: go and prepare yourselves. Understand that this struggle will not end in 1 week. Go, gain knowledge of why our people are oppressed. Find out the attitude of the international community. Build alliances if you can, but most importantly, ensure no lives are wasted. Don't act in excitement, act with insight. Where you can give somebody a slap, you discover he can listen, don't give the slap, talk instead. Now, after this advice, about less than 2 weeks later, Mandela and co were put in jail. These guys took the advice. I think 9 of them were very essential to driving the South African independence. Now, my point is this. All the young people I deal with, all of them are idealistic. You must accept their idealism. You must also tell them your own story, how excited you were at that age. But that if you didn't learn certain things, it wouldn't have worked. So understand them, acknowledge the rightness of their anger, show them a way out of it at the lowest level up to the highest. For instance, in their teamwork, you find many of them acting exactly like those they are condemning, ordering their mates around, asking somebody who is your mate to carry your bag, and the man in charge say, hey, that's not how it used to be. Now, why does that matter? In every environment where you make interventions, you will pray and hope that it touches between 5 and 20%. If it does, it's a fundamental change. Absolutely. And I'll close with the example of Adeniran Ogunsoya of Lagos. Chief Adeniran Ogunsoya, as a boy, saw Zik talking. He listened to him, he looked at, he was so impressed. I want to become enlightened like this man. He left this country as a stowaway in a ship, came back, prepared for leadership, and was Zik's loyalist all his life. But that's not the point I'm making. During the war, when the Igbos ran away from Lagos, Chief Ogunsoya was the one who took inventory of their houses, collected rents and all the rest of it. When they came by, he gave them their money. Now, that's only one person who was affected by Zik. A lot of other people were affected by so many other things. So when you want national transformation, it doesn't mean that it's only when you do it in a stadium. Do something where you are. You don't know where that character in front of you will be in the next 30 years.
And that's an amazing place to leave it, Prof. It's very, very insightful conversation. Thank you so much for your time this morning. Professor Okey Ikechukwu is Executive Director of Academy. Thank you so much for your time this morning. Okay. Food for thought, right? Well, there's more where that came from after this break. To stay with us.